Rolling averages are a great way to be able to smooth out a time period if you have lots of peaks. And also it gives you a sort of benchmark to kind of look like performance over a certain period of time. And you can do this not only with just days, but weeks and months and years if you wanted to. And I'm going to show you how to do all three and how to dynamically change it and use conditional formatting to highlight if it's above or below the rolling average too. So with that in mind, let's head over to my Power BI desktop. So if you want to follow along, the sales data set and the dim date table are in the description below. And all you need to do to import it is go get data, and then do Excel workbook and then import the sales data that way. And then for the dim date table, that is in a notepad, which is just the M code in it. All you need to do is just click on transform data if you're not already in that view, go to new source, do blank query, go to advanced editor on the blank query, copy the M code from the notepad for the dim date table, highlight all that, paste it in. Once you're done, it will look like this. Click done, and then just rename it dim_date. And then that way you can then use this, because all you need to do is click close and apply, go to your model view, and then look for your sales data, find the order date, and then you just drag the order date to date here to connect it. And then that will give you a many to one relationship and needs to be single and make the relationship active. And then this way we can use the additional date table structure instead of just using just the one date. This will help with the weeks and the months. So now that's set up, all the data that's going to be going through this particular tutorial is going to be using what is the sum of sales. So we call it total sales in this instance. And all I've done is just do sum, and then within there, the sales column to be able to pull through each total sales, depending on what we're looking at. In this case, we're looking at the actual dates. So each order date and the amount of sales in that order date. And then also included week here. So week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on and so forth. And then you can see the totals there and everything. So the core measure that we're going to be using to be able to build out our rolling average is going to be using dates in period to be able to look at the period of time which you want to look at, to be able to grab what's the total amount in that period of total sales. And then we're going to divide it by the same amount again, and that will give you your average. And how that works is what you want to be able to do is find out what's the max date that is sitting within the data that you're looking at. So if we go back to our table quickly, I've included a max date here so you can see what that looks like. So we can see this is the actual date, so this is the order date, and the max date is the max order date. But you'll notice when it goes to weeks, it then picks up what the max week is. So it's basically picking up what was the last date in that week, and that's where you get the max date. So this is where it will help when doing either a day, because it doesn't matter, because whatever day it is, it's always going to be max that day. But if it's a week, it's always going to use the week end. So it contains that whole week. And then if you do a month, it would be the month end and then containing that whole month and then looking back as well. So that's the reason why we have the max date here. And then we're going to have a count of how many days in this case we want to do, but then it can be same for weeks and months. I'm doing all these with variables because it makes it a lot easier to sort of manage what you're working with, because basically we want to have something that was just doing one thing and then another thing controlling another, because let's say if you wanted to go in and go, I actually wanted it to be 7 days. You can then just go in and just change the 7 there. And that changes not only how far back we look at to get the full amount, but then also what we're dividing by as well. And this plays a key part in when we do it dynamically. So if you make that 3 again, just and then we can look against the other ways of doing it and see how they differ. Now we have that one in. This part here is the key to be able to get you what your amount is. So what this is doing is it's calculating total sales for the period of max date minus 3 days. So in essence, if we go back here, this is total sales for the max date of the 22nd, and then this is back 1, 2, and 3. So we go 1, 2, 3. That will then give you what is that. So if we take that amount, that amount, that amount, and divide that by 3, we get that amount. So to prove that point, let's go here. So this one, copy that amount, paste it in, plus this amount, copy value, plus this amount, and then last one is this one. And then if we equal that, that gives us a total for this here. And then if we divide that by 3, we get this amount, as you can see. So that's why it's looking at 3 days. Obviously, if you wanted to go back further, you can. And in essence, if you wanted to not include the current week, which wouldn't know why you would want to do that, but let's just say if you didn't want to include the current week, you technically could do min date -1, and then that will do a starting point of there, which means it will be the week before. So instead of it being this date, it will go back there. But then also, if you want to skip a day, it means it would start there and then. It wouldn't really make sense, but you could do that if you wanted to. So like I said, all this is doing is basically calculating those 3 days there, and if you changed it to 4, it will go there, and then it will go into the blanks as well, and then calculate those up. And then we're just doing the final result, which is just the rolling metric divided by the days. So we're taking the total there, basically what I did on the calculator, and then dividing it by the number of days. And because in here, we've got the dates in period that's basically going dim date, max date, minus number of days, and then by day, and then that gives us a total. So that's how it works and how it operates. Just for clarification on the dates in period. So as you can see, that is what calculates that plus that plus that, which is what we did in the calculator. And how it does that, it just takes total sales, and then dates in period, and how that operates is looking at that's your core starting point, which is your dates. And then it's using that to then work out if it's a max date. You're going, use this. What's the next point of where it wants to start? So we want to start at max date, which is what that one is. And then we want to minus 3 days, which is there. And we want to do it by day, because you can do month as well, and year. And then that gives you your total. And then that's where we can divide it under the result here. So we're just doing exactly what we did in the calculator, and that's how you get that result. And that's basically all you need to do rolling days. Now, there are other ways you can do this as well. You can do the same layout, but with averagex. And what averagex does is it takes your whole table, and this is where x's come into play. It's because it looks at a whole table, and then it will summarize to the point of what you're averaging. So this is exactly the same layout with max date and 3 days as we had originally, but also you can include here as the slight difference. So everything else here is the same. The only thing is you're wrapping it in an averagex, and then you're saying it by dim date as well. And you have to do the values because naturally it wants to pick out a measure, but you're telling it, I want to do it by this. And that's what the averaging is working out by. And then it's going to give you the amount that it's doing. So basically it's going average by these and giving you the result of this. So what is the average per date for that? The problem is that because averagex is relying on there being data in that particular table for that particular date, if you have any gaps like we have here, it will assume, oh, we don't need to include that, and we'll skip it. And so as you can see, we have 2 days here that are not included. Now, if you look at the one that we just created, and then if we look at the one that we're looking at here with the averagex, exactly the same process but doing a different thing, you'll notice everything is the same here until here and here and here and here, and then it goes back to normal again. And the reason is this. And as you'll see, this is a good example here. This is when, okay, I'm now going to averagex. And because we're averagexing, we don't need to do the divide by because it's doing it within here. So we're not doing a divide. It's basically counting and going like, okay, number of periods back then. Okay, oh, there's no data here. So I know that's 3 days that need to cover from the point of where I'm looking here. So 1, 2, 3. Great. Oh, this is the total. I'll divide that by 3. And you go, oh, this is the total. I'll divide that by how many days are actually showing up. It's not actually picking up that it was 3 days because there's no data there. So all it's done is go, I'll look back 3 days, total that. How many did I count? 1. So therefore, I'm going to give you, this is the average of the last 3 days, which isn't true because unless there are instances where you don't want to include data that where there hasn't been any sales, you do actually want to know what the average was. Because if you didn't make any sales there, that could be any reason. But if it's that you didn't do any sales, that would technically be 0. And because this is using a measure, it won't give you a 0 and you won't know it's a 0. So therefore, it's completely missing it out. And you'll notice that this is the case for this one here as well, but not for this one here. But I'll cover those in a sec. These are using the Windows function. You have 2 choices here. If you wanted to, and you needed to be able to have those removed and wanted to just see the total of what actual sales have happened since that period and the total average for those last 3 days, and it is only because 1 day is what was actually happening. You might have that in a case of where maybe weekends sales don't happen and you don't want to include them, so you really only want to look at what actually happened over the last 3 days. But that's not always going to be the case. So be careful when you pick what you choose, because if you select the wrong one, you'll get the wrong result. So pick the one that suits your need and make sure you document it as well, because if you do end up using this one, people need to know that it's skipping particular blank days or weeks or whatever period you're looking at. And then, as I mentioned, I've got two more here, which are again using the same way in a way, and two more here, and one which is using averagex and one that's using the sum and the average, which is why you can see here these match up, because this is doing exactly the same as this, and then this one is doing exactly the same as the first one, which we got here. And what the Windows averagex one is, so as we covered averagex there, which is this one as well, you'll notice this we didn't have to do any variables or anything. We can just run it purely through just the calculation, and that calculation is using the Windows function here, which is the difference. But as you'll notice, this part is technically all the same as what we had when we were doing the other one for the rolling amount. And then the difference here is you're using window to be able to look back at 2 days relative from the date. So relative as of this, and then relative back to. This doesn't work out that you're doing it by 3, because it takes into account this is 1. So then if you want to do -2, that would be 3 days. So then that's how you can do that there. So if you wanted it to be 5 days, you need to do -4, so on and so forth. And then within that, you then want to do dim date all, because that's where you want to be able to open up here, because otherwise it will look and go, oh, filtered to this, and only look at one. You want to actually open up your table for this and then be able to use it, and then you're ordering by dim date, so therefore you're then going in the correct order that you want to look at. So in essence, it's dividing the last 3 days again by if there are actual days, and then it'll give you a result, which is why you get the same result as the previous one, because if you have any blanks, it includes them as a means of counting back, but doesn't actually divide by it. So therefore it's only dividing by 1, giving you the result of 3 days ago it was that, not the average. But you'll notice where it doesn't overlap, so here and here, it all matches up because there is actual data for the last 3 days. It's just when it goes into a blank, that's where the problem happens. And the same is if you do this particular one using the divide. It's exactly the same process as the other one again. It's just this time, instead of doing the averagex, you're just doing the calculator of the total sales, and then the window with your relative date going back 2 days beyond the first date, which is the starting point. So if you wanted to, you could actually do it offset. You could do -1 and -3, so then you're looking at 3 days previous. And then you do the all, and then order by, and then all I've done is just do a divide after it, 3, and then give you a divide by 3, and that's where that works there. The only thing where that's an issue is, as you'll see, once we start moving into weeks, it's now dividing the week by 3. So if you wanted to use this particular thing outside of it, you'll need to change it for each time and not have it that you could just use this one time for doing days, weeks, months, years, whatever you want to do. And this is why I'm focusing on the first one, because this one is the most versatile to use and the most reliable. And then the great thing is, with a rolling average, is that you can then apply it into your total sales, and then you can see how it performs. So instead of getting these big spikes here, which we can see it's doing that, and you can see the difference between if you're using the averagex version, because you still get these kind of weird spikes because it's skipping out those blank days. So as you can see, it slightly smooths out because you're not including these outliers of large days in that time. So now you know how to do day, let's move over to weeks. So to keep this one nice and simple, we are taking what is technically exactly the same as the days one, just with a slight alteration of, instead of just having days as what it is there, I've now included a variable that's called weeks, and that's going to be your driver to give you weeks. And the reason is datesinperiod does not have the option of week. So if we go here, you can see you can pick day, month, quarter, year, no week. How do you get around it? Well, all you have to do is know there's 7 days in a week, times it by the number of weeks, and that's your number of days. And then that takes away that amount. So basically 21 days is what this is rolling back on. It's taking the last 3 weeks of total sales, summing it up, and then we're dividing it by the number of weeks to be able to give you the same result. And this is what I mean by it being more versatile, is because you can slightly adjust it, give you the result that you need. And the good thing is, because we're using a dim date table, if you were to have an instance where you have a retail calendar or financial period or anything like that. Whatever you have set in here, this will be able to operate. So if you're always using weeks, you don't have to worry about going, oh no, it's giving me a different end date of what that period is. If you change it and have your dim date table set up so it can deal with different time periods or different calendars for the business, this will still work. And again, this is why I like using it, because it's so versatile. So what you'll see here is two sets of graphs. So this is the day one. So down here we're using date, and you can see how it's all very volatile and how it sort of peaks. And then if you had the 3 weeks rolling, it's higher because it's a higher amount. But you can see it's slightly smoother, but you can see how it's operating. Now, if we apply the exact same thing, but this time using end of week, like we have here, this then gives you total sales in green by week, and then your rolling average of weeks here as well. So you can see over the time period, it's a lot smoother than what you got there. And that's where this one works so well for weeks. And now we come to rolling average month. And rolling average month is pretty much the same as the days. It's just the slight difference is we're not using days, we're using months. And then also we are using month here. So if you remember before, I showed you that the only things available was day, month, quarter, year. We're using month here because that is available, unlike week when we had to do that change where we were doing timesing the number of weeks by 7 to give you by days how far that needed to look back. And this works very similar in the same way. It's just because we're using max date at that point and we are looking at the end of the month, which is why when we got the month, we can always look at the end of the month. It's then going to go minus how many months and then give you the result. And then that's why if we look here, we get the result, because this would be that plus that plus that divided by 3, so on and so forth. Because it's using actual month, it's actually looking back by the month. Now, if you are using different like retail weeks where you have 445, 445, even an invoicing calendar where you're working to the 445, 445, months is probably not going to be the best thing you want to use. But if you've got somewhere where you're using purely by months, this works absolutely fine. But it's best to work with weeks if you're going to be working with particular periods that are different amount of weeks and not your standard calendar. And again, if we look at this split by day, then we look at this and it gives you the amount by day and then the average over 3 months. So for technically each day, it's giving you it. So it's actually looking back over the period of time. And look, it's a little bit more, and you can see it drops off massively because of depending on when the amounts that are there. But this gives you a better idea of what's happening, because if you're looking at it now using end of month as your driver here, you're then getting the amount per month as a total. So if we're looking at the end of Feb, we're getting that amount. And then if we're looking at the end of March, we're then getting that amount. Thing is, you probably just need to clean these up slightly, because as you can see, it looks like that's saying March, but it isn't. That is actually March because it's just how it's positioned, and because you're using the end. Technically, you could use the start as well. That would do the same, because all you're doing is taking up the whole period. It gives you the result of what you need, and then it gives you a nice, smoother line that you want. And then, like I say, with this sort of setup, and this is how you do it, because if you wanted to suddenly go like, no, I want to look at the last 6, it's so easy. You can just go in, change that to 6. So now this is calculating from the end of the month, whatever period it is, and looking back the last 6 months, and then giving you result and then dividing it by 6. And then look at that. You got a smoother line now, because it's constantly smoothing it out to give you an idea of what's happening. And because it's so easy just to do that change just by going in, what happens if you just wanted to do it on the fly while you're using the actual report? Well, that's where you can do it dynamically. You can do this by creating a parameter that changes on the amount you want. So in this case, I've created one that goes from 1 all the way up to 30, and I've got it connected to all 3 different periods. So you've got your days, weeks, and months. So technically, if I'm doing 30 here, I'm looking at the last 30 months, the last 30 weeks, and last 30 days. Now, if I bring this down, let's go to 3, we are now matching up with what we've done before. So these are what I've been going through. The sums here, that's total sales. Those are the sums we got there for the last 3 days. I've now created extra dynamic measures that give you your rolling average based on every time this moves, it then changes the number of days, weeks, months. So now that's set to 3, you'll notice everything matches up. They all match up. They all match up. I forgot to put the currency on that one, but they all match up, as you can see here. Now, if I was to change it, so let's say just 4, you'll see suddenly everything changes, because now instead of just looking at the last 3, it's 4. And then I've also included this particular thing here so you can see how many days are rolling. So you've got that visual trigger to be able to look at it. And then you'll notice here what we've got is our different charts. So this time I've got days here, we've got our weeks here, and we've got our months, and then total sales is the gray. The blue is our original hard-coded 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months, and then the red is the dynamic. So if I was to just change this back to 3 again, the red will go over the blue and it will look like there isn't anything there because it matches and it's the last one, so it overwrites it. But if you were just to change it, do 6, you'll now see this is how it changes the last 6 weeks in this case, the last 6 months here, and the last 6 days here. And how you do it is all you have to do is create under modeling, you'll have a new parameter. If you go to the numeric range, call it what you want, give it a whole number. If you're doing it by 1, then that's what the increment is. Your starting point, like I say, I just did 1 and 30, so you can do as much as you want really, and you could make them, if you didn't want them to go up by things, you want to do it by 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months. And that's the thing, you don't have to do days, weeks and months. I've just done that so you see it work dynamically with everything, and it works with everything. But if you just wanted to just focus on weeks and you wanted them to go up by every 2 weeks, so you didn't want them to select anything that goes in between with an odd number, then you can then do up to 30 weeks, or let's say 26 weeks. You can then go name it whatever you want, and then this adds a slicer to the page as was what you get here, and it will come out exactly like this, and then you can just format it how you please. I didn't touch anything with it, I just left it as it was. But once it's done, you'll get this generated amount here, which is what you've got here, and then you get this rolling average number value. And this is like a little measure that gets created, and then what you want to then put in to your average. So if we go, this is days. So if you remember our days, everything is exactly the same. The only difference now is instead of putting in 3 here, I've just put in that measure that was created by creating that slicer over here. So then this is basically now defaulting to 6. Whenever I change it, it'll change for anything else. And then it'll always remove it, because what it's doing, it's adding how many days are there and then how many days it's going to be divided by. And it's the same for months. So as we can see here, our months is just changing the number. It's exactly the same measure. And again with weeks, it's exactly the same measure. It's picking up this here in the place of weeks. So now you know you're happy with being able to do this dynamically. What happens if you want to have to do some little bit of tricks? So let's say we wanted to be able to highlight if total sales is above or below the last X amount of rolling days, weeks, months. So in this case, we're sticking to our 6 again. We can change it as much as we want, but we're only looking at total sales with the rolling number of whatever days, weeks, months. This is the amount. And then it's basically going, this is higher than that. So it's green. There was no sales then. So that was lower. So therefore that gives you an average that is lower. So it's going to be red. And then, green, because it's higher, higher, higher. No, that is lower than that. So it goes red and it gets applied. And this is really simple, because all you're doing is creating an extra measure that is just looking at, here's the total sales and here's the amount here, and then you're just taking it away from the total sales. So then that's basically giving you a result of whatever that is minus. So in essence, this is 0. That's going to be minus 710.84. And therefore, because it's less than 0, that is now going to make it red. So once you have this particular calculation in place, because all you're doing is getting the difference. So let's just drop it in so you can just see what it looks like quickly. Here we go. Let's open this up, bring that in a bit. As you can see, this is completely the difference of everything that's there. So like I said, these are minus this because it's 0, and then this was higher because the difference is over 4,000 and over 2,000, over 2,000, then just under 2,000 less, and that's why it's in red. So that's all that's doing, and then you can apply the same logic for each one. So as long as you're picking your total sales, applying it to whatever period you're looking at, and then just applying whatever that rolling average is. So I'm not doing total sales of week or total sales of month or anything, because the total sales is the amount that's being picked up in your table or your visual, depending on how you want to look at it. And then all you have to do is, if we click back on the table, make it back smaller. And then if we go up to our format visual, and then down here we have cell elements, and then within cell elements, you want to select whatever column it is. This one's defaulted automatically to total sales. Then we go to our background color. And then when you come in, you generally start in gradient. What you want to do is come over to rules. And then once you're in rules, you'll see here, it will then give you this, and this should default to total sales. Let me just set this up as if it's first time you're doing this. There we go, total sales. And what you need to do is find whatever one you conditional format is. So I've got total sales, and then I've got CF for conditional format, and then you've got my day, month, and week. So I'm doing day at the moment, so that's the one I pick, and do new rules, make everything number. We want 3 of these because we want one to be a light red, one to be a light orange, and one to be a light green. For your rag status, red, amber, green. And then we want to do a minimum and a maximum because you want it to just go on forever. And then for the orange, we want that to be if it's exactly 0, so we keep that one there. And then we want that to be greater than, not equal to, because that's what that one is. So anything greater than 0 is going to be green, anything less than 0 is going to be red, and anything that is exactly 0 is going to be orange. And then you do OK, and then you see nothing changes because I've just done exactly the same conditional formatting that was already set. And that's how you do the conditional formatting. Now what happens if you suddenly like, oh, I want to do everything in one, and I want to be able to switch between days and weeks and months. I don't want to have separate tables and charts, and I want the conditional formatting to be dynamic. I want all this kind of stuff. Well, you're in luck because it's right here. And this works perfectly because, as mentioned, you need to have the columns and even the axis here to change depending on what your period is looking at. Because if you remember, if we look back at the old charts, when we had days and then we had the average weeks and months, it's massive because it's all at the top. This is why if you were to switch between stuff, you would have to think, okay, not only am I changing what the rolling average is, I need to change what the columns are, what's being picked up as well. So in this case, we're looking at days here, but if we wanted to look at weeks and we did it the other way, this would mean the days amount would be down here, weeks would show up here, and then days would still be here and it'd be weeks, and it wouldn't give us what we want. But with this trick, you can click on weeks and then look, change it to weeks. And then you got your total sales in weeks. You got there. It's got the conditional formatting, and this has changed as well. And the same goes for months. Do months. There you go. So then you got months. Everything's changed to months. We can then go, oh, I want to do 3 months. Change it. Everything changes. Oh, 3 weeks. Oh yeah, let's have a look at 3 weeks. Oh, that's 3 weeks. Okay, let's look at 7 weeks. Oh, there we go. Change 7 weeks. And we do days. We go up here, and then let's do 14 days. And we can see it changes and everything. And also up here, tells you what the periods are. Oh, look, we click on this, 14 weeks. This one, 14 months. Yep. Clever, eh? So how I've managed to do this is I've done a mixture of creating its own separate table. So if I come over to here and then show you this, I created a very simple table. And to do that, all I did was do enter data, created 2 columns. One was called sort because it does everything in alphabetical, and I want it to be days, weeks, months, not days, months, weeks, which is what it does if you don't add a sort. So what I did is do 1, 2, and 3. So return because otherwise put it in, and then show it in days, weeks, and months. And then I just called it rolling average period, which is what I've got here. So rolling average period, and I won't save this because otherwise it will error because it already exists. But that's basically what I did. As you can see here, that's all it's called. Yep, cancel that. And then if we come back to it, within here, we have our period and our sort, and then that's what's in here. So if I click on this, go back to days again, you'll see the rolling average period. That is the column with the days, weeks, months. That's just in a slicer. So all I did was just add a slicer, did it as button, vertical list, single select. So it's always one selected, and then you can change around anything else you want. I kept it as it is. So what I did, I created a measure that then I could use to be able to go, whatever time this is selected, give me the days, weeks, or months measure that we created previously for the dynamic one. And the first thing you want to be able to do is put in what the value is going to be. So I've done variables here because I'm doing a switch and I'm doing extra bits. So if you never ever need to update stuff, it always makes it a lot easier when you're working with variables. And then all I've done is do underscore value equals max rolling date average period. And you have to put this into something because you want to do whatever the max is being selected. It's just giving you a result. You can't just write rolling average period and put it in there. It won't work. So you have to wrap it in something like max or min. Doesn't really matter which one you use. It does the job. And then that gives you if this, so the max of what's selected equals days, in this case what we do, give us that measure. Same for weeks, give us that measure and that, and then I've just done blank. If not, single select, so it won't do a blank, but always good practice to do that. And because it's just one particular thing and not doing different formats, you can just format this whole measure to currency and then pull it in and it will work. So if I click on this, you'll see that is the measure that I've put in here, the total sales rolling average measure, and that's what that is. So this is how it switches between the two. But you'll notice down here these change. This is where I needed to take into account if I'm using fill parameters. Now here I wanted it to show week number, not end of week. Here I'm using end of week. Months, same, end of month. Could you start a month if you wanted to? I'm just using end of month in this case. And days is just days. And technically this is the same as being used. What I did, I created a fill parameter, which you go up to modeling. And you remember when we did the numeric range, this is doing it by fields. So you go into fields and then you don't want to add a slicer in this case, you just want to create your table. And this one I've called rolling average period rows. And then all I've done is go into the dim date table, pull in date, which is there, and then week of year, I think it was week of year. Yep, that's for the week. And then I just changed that to week. And because I needed it to match the names as well, this is another thing you need to take into account. As long as everything matches up here, you need to do that. So it's days, weeks, and then month, end of month was the one I used. And then I just called that months. And then I created that. Then that gave me this. And as we can see here, you got your days, weeks, months, name of And what that does, it creates a table. So if we come back over to this one, we now have this column here, days, weeks, months, what it's picking up. So the field it's picking up and then the sort order that it's put in. What I've then done is taken that table I created where it said days, weeks, months with the sort as the first bit. You can see here. So your rolling average period here, this month, the sort thing there. And then what I've done is I've done my rows here and then I've done the same with chart. Now chart's slightly different because I've used end of week. So instead of end of month, so you see here for the rows, the different one is week of year. So I've got the number. For the chart, I wanted date. So I did end of week. So that exists there. That is what feeds in. So you do exactly the same as you did before with the row selector. You create another one using the fill parameter. And then all I've done is take the first part. You remember where we named everything days, weeks, months? That's what this column is here. I've then assigned it to our period table that is which we created manually. I've then had to go in because it actually made everything blank, and because it's one-to-one and it only gives me both, and then I had to make the relationship active and then I saved them. And then because this is both and doing that, it means every time you use the selector in here for what you want, it automatically changes here and here because I'm now putting the chart as my x-axis, the rolling period chart x-axis, and the one that I showed you doing in fill parameters, which is exactly the same you need to do for the chart one, is there as well. I've just got year in there as a separate thing, could include that as well. But that's it. Because you're connecting it in the data model, everything is being fed by this. So it dynamically changes everything. And then for your conditional formatting, it's no different to what we had before. It's your total sales minus that new rolling average measure here to give you the result. And then all you do is just do the same conditional formatting you did before. And then you've got your dynamic conditional formatting on top of everything else being dynamic. Amazing, right? So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please give a like and subscribe. And if you want to carry on your analytical journey, check out these videos over here. And as always, until next time.